This passage from Isaiah 11 is arguably my most favorite passage of all Scripture. And again, Isaiah comes across as this incredible childlike optimist, where children be able to play next to a cobra and not be harmed, and all that. You've seen it there. So, and what's interesting about this is as incredible and almost unbelievable the description that Isaiah presents to his readers, Jesus surpasses it. And that's what's really incredible. So I want to remind you about John the Baptist that you probably already know. John the Baptist is a cousin of Jesus. He was born 6 months before Jesus. And John the Baptist's daddy and mommy was Elizabeth and Zachariah. And Zachariah was part of that Levitical priesthood. So if you remember when Moses went in about 1,300 years before John the Baptist, Moses led the Israelites into the desert, out of enslavement into the promised land. And only the Levite, the tribe of Levi, remained faithful to Moses with the golden calf thing. And so then Moses established the Levitical priesthood. And John the Baptist's daddy was Zachariah was part of that Levitical priesthood. Now, interesting enough, though, Moses' brother Aaron, he had 24 grandsons, and these 24 grandsons made up the 24 courses of the Levitical priesthood that lasted from about 1,300 years before Jesus all the way into Jesus' time. And Zechariah was part of one of these 24 courses of Levitical priesthood. And then each month, then each of that course, they were drawn a name. And 9 months before John the Baptist was born, Zechariah's name was drawn, and he was allowed, the high priest at that moment, to go into the inner chambers of the temple, clean up things and change candles and incense. And then that's where he had the encounter with the angel Gabriel, where the angel Gabriel said to Zechariah that he and Elizabeth will be with child. And 9 months later, they had John the Baptist. So John the Baptist was born of the Levitical priesthood. Now, here's where it gets a little sketchy here. Scholars, and especially John Bergsma, one of my favorite scripture scholars, he's a convert to the faith from the Protestant tradition, and he believes that John the Baptist left Jerusalem and that the Levitical priesthood that he was supposed to be a part of, and he went down, and if you recall, Jerusalem is built on a hillside, Mount Zion, and when you go down the hill due east, you go into the Jordan River as he empties out into the Dead Sea. And sea level wise, that's the lowest place in the world. It's some 600 plus feet below sea level. And of course, that Dead Sea, there's a reason why they call it the Dead Sea. The Jordan empties out into the Dead Sea because it's dead. Nothing living in that sea. It's so filled with minerals and everything. And so John, along the west banks of that Dead Sea, there was this group of escaped Jews, if you want to call it that, called the Essenes. And they lived a very austere lifestyle. Among them, they were living celibate lifestyles, and they lived very simple lifestyles, and they lived in caves along the banks of the Dead Sea. And that's where Dr. John Bergsma thinks that John the Baptist went down there with the Essenes. However, John Bergsma also thinks, and a lot of scholars think too, that the Essenes weren't even austere enough for John the Baptist. And so some people think he actually got kicked out by the Essene community. And by the way, that's where the Qumran is and the Dead Sea Scrolls are, in those caves that they found later. So John the Baptist, they think, got booted out of the Essenes, and then he's in the southern part where the Jordan empties out into the Dead Sea. He's in there preaching the gospel. And when we talk about a desert in the southern part of Israel, it is everything you think about as a desert. It is a desert. Although you got the waterway with the Jordan River running into the Dead Sea. And then notice how John is in the wilderness. Both Matthew, Luke, and the gospel writer John depicts Jesus as a voice crying out in the wilderness. This comes from Isaiah 40th chapter, where John says, a voice crying out in the wilderness will make straight the way of the Lord. And so John is recognizing, I'm that guy. I'm that guy that Isaiah may mention 600-700 years before he existed. And John the Baptist saying, I'm that guy, I am the voice. Now, what's important for us to understand with the wilderness is this. That when Moses, 1,300 years before Jesus, led the Israelites out of enslavement into the promised land, there was a 40-year journey in the wilderness, in the desert. And God was present there in the glory cloud. God is always present when we need Him the most, when we're in our desert moments. That's when God is present. And so John understands that, so he's going to make straight the path. And then lastly, I want to draw your attention to our psalm we took from Psalm 72, where the psalmist says that He will rescue the poor when He hears cry out, the afflicted when he has no one to help him. He will lift up the poor and the lowly, and the lives of the poor He shall save. Now, this is an example of wilderness, of people being oppressed and going through different challenges in life. That's the wilderness. We can all relate to that. And that's where God is. He's going to meet us in our wilderness journey, our desert journey. So it's very symbolic that John the Baptist is in the desert. And you guys may have had this experience like myself, where you go through a deep, dark, challenging moment in life. And maybe some of you are going through it right now. And it just compels you to turn to God all the more. Like when I'm going through deep, dark moments, and we all do, I'm more compelled to come into that church. There's my office right there. And I'm compelled more to pray to God more. However, and I don't know if you had this experience, but when that deep, dark moment is lifted off of me, then I go back to, the status quo again, where I don't turn to God as much. Now, what's interesting about this is, and then I go through another deep, dark moment, I'll turn to God again more than I usually do. What's interesting about this Psalm 72, is this psalmist is saying, the psalmist recognized that when we go through deep, dark moments, we just naturally want to turn to God and say, help. We just naturally want to do that. And that's okay. But what this psalmist is teaching us is that even after we go through that deep, dark moment and get to a blessing moment, that unlike previously, we're going to still turn to God all the more. And here's what he says. After he talks about the lowly and those who are oppressed, and they cry out to God, and their relationship in the times of need is usually stronger than usual. Then he says, after God saves the life of the poor, may His name be blessed. As long as the sun, His name shall remain in the lives of people. In Him shall all the tribes of the earth be blessed. All the nations shall proclaim His happiness. So we're not going to go back into status quo. That somehow God's going to recreate us in a new way, where there's going to be a new heaven and a new earth. And not only are we going to turn God during the times when we're oppressed and going through dark moments, but we're going to turn to God even just as much when we're going through blessing moments. And that's what we call heaven. So in the meantime, we certainly kibitz about the dark moments that we go through, the desert moments. And maybe like John, we need to, when we go through good times, that we need to even fixate all the more on ridding ourselves and actually doing asceticism. where we do things in our life that makes us even more uncomfortable, so we can set our souls and our hearts right on Jesus. All of this teaches us that it's all about Jesus. During the good times, it's about Jesus, and especially John the Baptist teaches us, Jesus teaches us, that even during the bad times, and especially during the bad times, it is always about Jesus' very real presence in our lives.